6. Something to sell. I'm not saying everybody with something to sell is bad. I have merch and I may develop course materials later. But are they claiming that you should buy something from them to learn a language?
Why do you have to reinvent the wheel? There's companies that have really good programs like Pimsleur. There's great courses out there. There's hundreds of people working on this. I'd go with the company that's been doing this for decades rather than the YouTuber that's trying to convince everyone that they reinvented the wheel here.
The most fundamental problem we're dealing with here is that most people who truly are pro-establishment conformists do not perceive themselves as such. In English-speaking American culture, everyone's a rebel. Everyone's a revolutionary. Everyone is an explorer moving toward a new horizon in the mythology they construct in their own mind. Now, this kind of cultural brainwashing begins in early childhood, but it continues right up to the PhD level. You can go to a PhD program and nobody thinks to themselves as trying to preserve a tradition. Nobody thinks to themselves as stepping in the same footsteps where a great man or great woman has trod the earth before. No. Each and every person writing a PhD thesis has the delusion that they're doing something wildly original and new and rebellious, that they're changing and challenging the system. They're going to transform the status quo with their research, their creative writing, whatever it is. Someone like Oriental Pearl has a pro-establishment bias in praising Pimsleur in contrast to the language education you can get here on YouTube. This fellow Language Jones has the strongest bias imaginable in trying to perpetuate the illusion that his PhD in linguistics is worth something rather than nothing. Do you know how hard it is to get a lawyer to admit that law school is horseshit and we're way beyond a sunk cost fallacy? To get them to admit that no, they learned nothing in law school, certainly nothing to justify the cost of tuition, and that everything they did learn, they could have learned for free sitting in a library. And sitting in that library, it's not just books they'd be reading, watching YouTube videos. Film school. People are very eager to tell me how little they learned in film school. Business school. Very eager. Why? Because those are fields in which you can easily prove your worth without reliance upon the credential. Now, I'm construing a comparison here that's quite provocative and peculiar. Wait a minute. So in what sense is this fellow with a PhD pro-establishment and comparable to what you just said about Oriental Pearl?
Having studied, even actually speaking a lot of languages is nowhere near as effective for a teacher as understanding course design, knowing the science of memory, familiarity with the academic literature on second language acquisition.
If you look at the history of sports nutrition, sports training, Olympic athletes, Olympic coaches, professional baseball, hockey, nobody would believe the claim that the most effective forms of instruction are only attained through the study of academic papers by getting a PhD and reading peer-reviewed papers. Nobody would believe that. They would say, look at the guy who is the coach for the Cleveland Indians. Look at the guy who was the coach for this or that football team, hockey team, Olympic team. It's just not true empirically that universities are offering some kind of magical method that is more effective in coaching people as athletes or in guiding them through language acquisition. And if it were true, you would be able to quantify it and prove it. Now, am I saying that the most effective coaches in sport are high school dropouts? Are people who just have practical experience? No, that's not what I'm claiming. I'm claiming that reality is complex and contradictory. And you can find examples of guys who are incredibly effective in teaching languages and incredibly effective at guiding people through weight loss, gaining muscle mass, gaining proficiency in one sport or another, who come out of all kinds of different backgrounds. There is no secret sauce, and there is nothing behind the curtain if you spend tens of thousands of dollars on university tuition.
Having studied, even actually speaking a lot of languages is nowhere near as effective for a teacher as understanding course design, knowing the science of memory, familiarity with the academic literature on second language acquisition.
Let's tell the CIA, tell the US State Department, they've been doing it wrong this entire time with their classroom hours and their intense study. Tell them they just should have been watching anime they don't understand the whole time and review some Anki cards.
Pearl has real expertise in the study of Chinese, real expertise in the study of Japanese. Those are two languages in which Pimsleur education is uniquely awful, uniquely inadequate, uniquely overpriced. You would be paying a lot of money for utterly worthless, counterproductive, frustrating education in Chinese or Japanese if you sign up for Pimsleur. Now, I do not think Pimsleur is equally blameworthy if your first language is French and you are trying to learn Italian. If your first language is English and you are trying to learn German. The Pimsleur method for some of these closely related languages, which is what it was developed for, if you look at the history of how that method, that is kind of sort of another story. Someone like Oriental Pearl, who has been tremendously successful in acquiring ability in language, she has a kind of survivorship bias. I don't know if she looks back on her life and she genuinely feels that Pimsleur, the Pimsleur language course, spending hundreds of dollars on the course, that is what helped her achieve fluency in Chinese and Japanese. I am 100% certain it didn't help at all. I can even go so far as to say it hindered her if you're comparing it to the other methods she could have used the same amount of time, effort, cost, if we are talking in terms of opportunity cost, okay? That the Pimsleur method for those languages, Chinese and Japanese, would actually be an encumbrance, a hindrance, worse than alternatives, even worse than nothing. That is how bad the Pimsleur method is. Now, these two experts, two different experts in different fields, different languages, they both make repeated reference to the U.S. military, and the U.S. diplomatic services, foreign language institute, and so on, as if they are proven standards of excellence and adequacy in language education, and that they are not very real and ongoing failures, as if they are not examples of the crisis of education that YouTubers, including kind of celebrity polyglot YouTubers, are struggling to find new ways to cope with and overcome. I'm sitting in Canada. Do you want to look at what percentage of people who receive childhood education in our school system have testable, empirically verifiable reading comprehension of French today as adults? What percentage of them have the ability to communicate in French in an emergency, let's say? Set up something where you can test empirically. If you go out and measure this in Canada, the percentile rate of failure for that method of education is shockingly close to 100%. Now, I have taken BA courses, so university courses at the BA level. I have taken BA courses in Chinese. I have taken BA courses in Japanese. Do you want to go out and interview and test all the other people who took the same courses I took and figure out what percentage of them have reading comprehension of those languages today, speaking ability, a certain finite situation, how to respond to an emergency? Do you want to go out and measure that? Why do you think the universities don't want to go and measure that. Why is it these are not statistics commonly bandied about? Because those institutional methods are failing. They are failures. And people who are genuinely anti-establishment, people who are genuinely trying to explore toward a new horizon, who genuinely want to lead a kind of rebellion and present a new and better alternative, they are here on YouTube. They are not getting PhDs in linguistics in an education system that is unbelievably overpriced for what it is, gives you a worthless credential that can't give you any better employment than being a micro celebrity on YouTube, you know? They don't want to be a part of that establishment. They want to challenge it, change it, replace it, or provide the public with genuinely superior alternatives. That's the magic. That's the positive part of what's happening here on YouTube for languages living and dead, languages major and minor. You know, very small languages that Pimsleur can't make a lot of money out of, indigenous languages of Canada, endangered languages, they're here on YouTube. And you can learn them and study them and hear them spoken here on YouTube in a way that you never could through conventional academic publishing before, right? Major languages like Chinese, YouTube itself is an inestimably better resource for learning Chinese than the sum total of everything the Pimsleur Corporation ever produced. Don't want to go on and on about this. And honestly, with this audience, with whoever sees this video, I already know I'm pushing on an open door. I know there is not one person in this audience who is going to write into me and say, no, man, you know what's really useful for learning languages? Sitting in a university library and reading peer-reviewed academic articles on linguistics that deal with technical aspects of language acquisition, technical aspects of grammar, morphology, so on and so forth. That, you know, that's what's really effective, you know, or, you know, what's really effective is to sign up for and pay a ton of money for a mainstream corporate course like Pimsleur. In two very different ways, these represent the establishment. Now, the U.S. military, in some ways, they have the strongest motivation imaginable to admit that there's a problem. During the war in Iraq, and I always heard about it in Iraq rather than Afghanistan, I think in part because of the embedded journalists seeing this problem, the military was really openly saying, what we are doing to prepare men as translators is failing, and the failure rate is practically 100%. Now that I'm remembering, I have read a few articles talking about that in Afghanistan also. And, you know, I have read in detail about how the U.S. military teaches languages. I have met and spoken with guys in the Army, some of whom just because they were my classmates, but some of them were approaching me and trying to get advice on getting language education to compensate for how little they had learned, how grossly inadequate their language preparation was going through that military service, the military preparation. So again, do you want to test the language competence of men in the Air Force whose language training focuses entirely on being able to get on the radio and say to, you know, the Chinese military as planes are going back and forth between the Philippines and Okinawa, yes, I'm sorry, we're only passing through your airspace for this reason. We are on a non-aggressive flight. We're doing this, and this. They practice learning such a limited, focused set of phrases for just a few scenarios that happen again. We are on a routine patrol. There is a boat in distress. This is what they learn as a so-called linguist in the U.S. military. And still, the system fails. The guys who were prepared to go out, pull triggers in Afghanistan and Iraq, the failure rate, again, it's shockingly close to 100%. And those guys are in this audience too, on YouTube. Those guys are also like, look, man, I went through the U.S. military language course, and now here I am all on my own, and in my spare time, I got to get on YouTube and try to compensate for the fact that the system is broken. The system doesn't work. Now, again, two forms of bias here. One is the survivorship bias, when you are in the minority of people for whom the system did work, okay? And that includes Oriental Pearl. The system worked for her, but it probably worked for her because she fell in love, because she got married, because she got a long-term internship. I forget exactly. She got a job overseas. She got in the workforce. She was living there. She got a YouTube channel. She got super motivated to speak to people and start doing this stuff on YouTube with at least Chinese and Japanese I forget if there were some other languages in her history that way. There are all these different factors that have nothing to do with university education itself. And certainly have nothing to do with the Pimsleur language method, right? You can look at, the different bricks in the wall, the different factors that built up her language ability over some years. You can say, okay, yeah, I see the secret to her success. And by the way, also a huge amount of hard work, right? I mean, it's needless to say, it's not like it was easy for her. You say, okay, I see why this woman succeeded in achieving a very high level of ability in this language. Now, what if we go back and survey and empirically test all the other people who were in the classroom with her, right? You could start from high school. You could start from the BA. What about all the other people who took the same course, Intro to Chinese, Intro to Japanese? Where are they now? How many of them have reading comprehension? What is the failure rate? So survivorship bias, incredibly powerful. And for both of these people, pro-establishment bias, wanting to believe that the establishment can work for me and trying to convince the audience that the establishment can work for you. When the reality is the establishment is broken beyond repair. If you want to improve language education in the United States of America, you could burn all of the universities down. What we are doing here on YouTube, it may be easy for you to make a catty video joking around about how it's bullshit compared to the supposedly wonderful quality of education you can get in a PhD program reading peer-reviewed academic articles. You can't bullshit me on that, sister. Sorry, the other guy too. You can't bullshit me on that, brother. I know what's behind that curtain, right? And on the other hand, contrasting, the quality of language education you can get for free on the internet to what you can get for hundreds of dollars a pop from bullshit, outmoded, greed-driven corporate interests like those still publishing the utterly laughable Pimsleur language courses.
But like you're in a den of vipers. Like who gives a shit?
It's kind of baller to be like, I forgive you, while someone is still lying to you about the thing.